Hello and welcome to another class of world history. In this class, we are going to talk about the decline of feudalism. So, let me write the heading. If we have to talk about decline of feudalism, as told in other class, feudalism was an economic structure where land was seen as a major asset. Now, if feudalism declined, it simply meant that land ceased to be that major asset. Now, what were the reason and why did feudalism actually decline? So, when we write at the reason, the first reason is the Crusades and geographical discoveries. Now, what had happened in feudal society? The whole village or the whole society was a closed economy. People did not go out, or they did not want to see what was happening across the world. The villages had developed into a self-sustaining economy where agriculture was the primary activity. Most of the peasants were bounded to the land and nobles had almost all the privileges. They were given the right to levy tax, they were given the right to have free services from the peasants. As such, the peasants did not had a chance to move out. But then in 11th, 12th and 13th century, holy war took place where Roman Church tried to mitigate the problem of growing influence of Islam in Middle East. Army was created or raised, which were known as Knight Templars. They traveled to Middle Eastern, in Middle East, they came to Central Asia. Here in Central Asia, the last empire which had some root with the Greco-Roman Empire was still existent. The Byzantine Empire had preserved the last information of Greek and Roman architecture. At the same time, Islam itself had preserved many Greek and Roman antique maps, documents, statues and artifacts. Now, Crusaders who came to Asia, they found, who came to Turkey, who visited all the part of Asia, they found these artifacts and they took these artifacts back to Europe. Now, these artifacts had lot of demand in Europe. There was a market in Europe for these artifacts, but at the same time, the demand created not only market, the desire to create such artifacts which later on resulted in industries and trade guild, but it also excited people. It made people question who were Greeks, who were Roman, who were these people who were there in Europe, who ruled over the world and created such marvelous art, such marvelous history. So, this resulted in two things. First of all, Renaissance. As we know, Renaissance was an age of reasoning. Now, I already told you feudalism had developed a closed society where people had stopped asking questions. They were busy with their individual life. It was a self-sustaining economy and there was an inertia in the whole society. People were not looking outside. Renaissance was an age where people started questioning the present social structure, and obviously feudalism was massively criticized during this time. Then geographical discoveries happened. The Crusaders had brought back ancient map and these maps suggested that there were lands in Asia which had trade connection with Europe, and from Asia such rich articles such as silk and cotton and spices were brought to Europe which had medicinal properties as well. So, Renaissance led to enlightenment and one thing led to other. So, this resulted in scientific research and finally discoveries of new land. Now, these geographical discoveries also resulted in another thing, that is growth of trade. growth of trade and trade guild was a major blow to feudalism. After all, growth of trade gave a scope to people to opt for some other employment other than agriculture. Many peasants escaped the villages, the manors, to join the trading guild or to go out for a voyage. If they were successful in discovering new land, they would bring such article which had high demand in Europe, and this resulted in financial development of these peasants. So, growth of trade and trade guild were very important in declining feudalism in Europe. Along with that, there was one more thing that resulted in the decline of feudalism, that was the Black Death or the Black Fever. Black Death, which had been caused due to epidemics or pandemic diseases like plague, had resulted in decline of population. Almost half of the population of Europe had declined during this period, due to which labor became an expensive commodity. There were hardly any people left to till the land of the manor. As such, if they wanted agriculture to continue, labor had become a very important commodity, and the lords of the manor were ready to pay for such labor. This was also a reason why peasants started peasant revolt, because they also realized their worth and they wanted more and more right. To appease them, many charters were actually introduced by the king, but such charters were duly ignored by the nobles. This resulted in many peasant movement. So, we can write Black Death and peasant movement. Peasant revolts, we should say. Peasant revolts which led to the decline of feudalism. The next important point which I would say is the growth of town. And skilled artisans. Many peasants who were fed up with their life or who were frustrated with the life that they were living in, in the manor, escaped to town. Now, these towns first, they came up in those areas where trade was flourishing. So, we have Venice, which was flourishing in trade. Many Italian cities were flourishing in trade, and there the traders had formed their own trading guild and they had taken the control of the city. They were governing the city through city councils. Now, these councils were more democratic than the manors of the lord. So, what happened? These peasants, they wanted to escape manor, and they did, and this resulted in their escape to the town. In town, more and more people came and they started forming craft artisan guilds, merchant guilds, trading guilds, and industries where manual labor was used. Skilled artisans also came up because more and more people came together, they started learning craft, and this resulted in the growth of middle class. So, this also happened, growth of middle class. Who were these middle class? The first, first experience of reading the Greco-Roman literature went to those who went for trading to Middle East, to Central Asia. They came, they experienced that there were statues, artifacts, literature, books written by Greek and Roman scholars. They tried to study them, they gave money for their translation, and the first people who did that were merchants. Now, merchants not only earned lot of money through the market economy, but they also became influential enough to translate this book and read it themselves. They became intellectual class of the society. They were the one who introduced banking system, and this resulted in the growth of middle class who were also intellectual part of the society. They understood what was wrong, what was right. They demanded the freedom of people. They demanded basic right of the people, which was the right to liberty and equality. All these demands were basically an antithesis to a system called feudalism, which did not allow liberty, which did not allow any right. So, obviously, growth of middle class and growth of education was one such reason why feudalism declined. Along with that, growth of centralized government was also one such reason. Enlightenment era saw coming of philosophers like Machiavelli, who talked about one strong central administrative authority, a monarch who was all in all powerful. As such, it was an era when philosophers realized that in feudalistic society the power was disintegrated and it was spread across the people or nobles, but in the pre-industrial society, philosophers realized that one imperial king was needed for the growth of the society. As such, centralized administrative systems started coming up. Similarly, with the growth of job avenues in the town, more and more peasants started shifting to the town, and the lord of the manors found it hard to find labor for their land, so they started renting out land and their power also declined. The central administrative structure which developed in Europe, they relied on standing army instead of relying on the nobles, due to which the power of the noble itself declined. And then the king themselves started taking back the control of the land, and this resulted in the final decline of feudalism. So, these were certain points which resulted in the decline of feudalism. I hope this class was helpful for you.